On a warm September morning in 1982, a house in the suburb of Elk Grove Village, Illinois sits fuller than usual. 12-year-old Mary Kellerman has stayed home from school today, complaining of a runny nose and sore throat. To help alleviate her discomfort, her parents give her a capsule of extra-strength Tylenol and tell her to get some rest. A short time later, at 7 a.m., they find Mary collapsed on the bathroom floor and unresponsive. Frantically, they call 911. An ambulance quickly arrives and takes the child to nearby Alexian Brothers Medical Center, but they are unable to revive her, and at 10 a.m. she is pronounced dead. Hours later, not far from Mary's house, 27-year-old Adam Janus, a supervisor with the U.S. Postal Service, is suffering from shoulder pain that has caused him to take the day off of work. After sitting down and having lunch, he reaches for a bottle of extra-strength Tylenol to quell his symptoms and tells his wife he is heading into their bedroom for a nap. Not even 30 minutes later, his wife walks into the bedroom to speak with Adam and discovers him unresponsive. Paramedics arrive and find Mr. Janus has fallen into a coma. They work tirelessly to get his heart beating again and transport him to Northwest Community Hospital. News of Adam's condition quickly spreads to his family, and soon they are gathered at the hospital awaiting an update. Among them is Adam's brother Stanley Janus and his wife Teresa. The family hopes that Adam's condition isn't as dire as it first appears, but those hopes are dashed when Dr. Thomas Kim comes out and informs them that Adam has died. The grieving and bewildered family goes to Adam's bedside to say their final goodbyes before returning to his house. The emotional pain of losing a loved one so suddenly quickly manifests itself into physical pain, and every member of the Janus family reaches for the medicine cabinet. Adam's elderly parents take aspirin, but Adam's brother and his wife reach for the same bottle of extra-strength Tylenol that Adam had taken hours earlier. Back at Northwest Community Hospital, Dr. Thomas Kim goes about his day, but in the back of his mind is troubled over how a seemingly healthy 27-year-old could die so suddenly, without a reasonable explanation. Suddenly, a nurse rushes in and informs him that Mr. Janus and his wife have both been brought into the hospital unresponsive. The doctor is confused at first, believing the nurse is referring to Adam, but upon clarification realizes that this time it is Adam's brother Stanley. The doctor rushes to the ER and attempts to revive them, but despite his best efforts, 25-year-old Stanley Janus dies, following his wife Teresa just 2 days later. With 2 more lying dead in his emergency ward, Dr. Kim is now racking his brain trying to figure out what caused these mysterious deaths. He entertains carbon monoxide or food poisoning, but the symptoms do not seem to match up. In the interest of being thorough, he requests all medicine and food items be brought from the Janus residence so that he may examine them. Looking over all the items from the house, including the bottle of extra-strength Tylenol, Dr. Kim does not notice anything out of the ordinary and decides to contact a colleague with the Rocky Mountain Poison Center and explain the symptoms. After a lengthy conversation, Dr. Kim's friend states that the symptoms of the 3 deaths sounds eerily similar to cyanide poisoning, an odorless and tasteless substance that, when ingested, can kill very quickly. Believing his colleague might be onto something, Dr. Kim has lab work done on the 3 victims and tells them to check for the dangerous drug. Sure enough, the report comes back and tells a conclusive story. Adam, his brother Stanley, and Stanley's wife Teresa had all been poisoned with cyanide. Where the poison had come from, though, was still a mystery. and when a chance conversation linked the death of 12-year-old Mary Kellerman to the death of the Janus brothers and Teresa, that mystery would be revealed. While Dr. Kim worked to find out what had caused the deaths of 3 healthy young people, a coincidental conversation between 2 firefighters was taking place. One who had responded to the scene of the Janus residence earlier that day, and another who was friends with Mary Kellerman's mother and had heard of the tragic news about her death earlier that afternoon. While discussing the cases, the pair noticed a common thread. Both Adam and Mary had taken extra-strength Tylenol a short time before their passing. After speaking with the paramedics who had treated Adam and Mary respectively and confirming their suspicions, one of the firefighters quickly contacted Northwest Community Hospital and asked to speak with the doctor in charge of the Janus cases. Upon hearing this news and already working on the cyanide poisoning theory, Dr. Kim sends the bottle of Tylenol taken from the Janus house down to the medical examiner, while a team of paramedics goes over to the Kellerman residence and retrieves the bottle from there. Both were examined and shockingly revealed that several capsules inside of both bottles had been emptied out and replaced with a deadly poison. With the police now involved, a plan was being drawn together to get the word out to the community as quickly as possible. Tylenol's manufacturer, Johnson & Johnson, was also informed of the deaths and quickly worked to get the word out on a recall. All of this, however, would come too late for 3 more unfortunate victims. 27-year-old Mary Reiner was at home recovering from the birth of her 4th child. Still feeling the aches and pains that accompany giving birth, she reached for a bottle of Tylenol to soothe her pain, and minutes later collapsed on the floor in front of her 8-year-old daughter. She was rushed by ambulance to Central DuPage Hospital, where she had just given birth days earlier, and was pronounced dead upon arrival. 31-year-old Mary Mcfarland was an office worker at Illinois Bell Phone Company in Chicago, Illinois. During a long day of work, she began to develop a headache and took a Tylenol to alleviate it. Moments later, a co-worker found her lying on the bathroom floor and called an ambulance. She too was pronounced dead upon her arrival to a nearby hospital. 35-year-old Paula Prince was a flight attendant who had just flown home from Las Vegas and stopped at a local Walgreens pharmacy to purchase a bottle of Tylenol. After arriving home to her high-rise apartment near Chicago's North Side, she took one of the capsules and prepared to unwind from her long journey home. She collapsed in her closet a short time later, and her body was discovered 3 days after with an open bottle of Tylenol sitting on her bathroom sink. In all 3 of these cases, the bottles containing the Tylenol were tested and discovered to have been laced with cyanide pills. By this point, officials were in full-blown panic mode, and without our modern conveniences of cell phones and social media, police and medical personnel had to go through great lengths to make sure citizens were aware of the poisoned medicine. Vans with loudspeakers were sent through the streets of Illinois, warning people not to purchase any Tylenol capsules from their local drugstores. Warnings were also played across television screens and through radio announcements. Johnson & Johnson announced what at the time was one of the largest product recalls in history, removing an estimated 31 million bottles of Tylenol from store shelves. The question for police now, though, was who and why. Initially, officers were skeptical of the theory this was a killer targeting their victims at random. The investigation revealed that the person involved had apparently stolen bottles of Tylenol off of the shelf, went home and replaced the medicine inside of the capsules with cyanide, then returned them to the store. It just didn't seem plausible to investigators that someone would do this just to hurt random people. Theories were kicked around that perhaps only one of the victims had been the true target, and the killer had poisoned others just to try and cover his or her tracks. Victims' family members were interviewed extensively, as police desperately tried to find a link between the 7 of them. But one by one, they were all eliminated as suspects, leaving law enforcement officials back at square one. Their first potential lead came when a bar owner named Martin Sinclair came forward and told officers that a man named Roger Arnold, who frequented his bar, had talked about keeping cyanide at his house. This led the desperate investigators to quickly apprehend Arnold for questioning. The news media, who were almost equally desperate for information, got wind of this and released Arnold's name to the public. This caused a flurry of attention to Mr. Arnold, attention that he would later claim caused him to have a nervous breakdown. After bringing him in for questioning several times and multiple searches of his home, police could find no link between Arnold and the killings, and officially ruled him out as a suspect. Arnold would spend the next several years blaming Martin Sinclair for ruining his life, and in the summer of 1983 went to Sinclair's tavern with a gun looking to kill the bar owner. Instead, however, Arnold took the life of a man named John Stanisha, who bore a strong enough resemblance to Sinclair. Roger mistakenly identified him as the bar owner. In 1984, Roger Arnold was sentenced to 30 years for the killing and released after serving 15 years of his sentence. He would live out the rest of his days quietly before passing away in 2008. With one lead turning into a dead end, police were once again back at the drawing board with no real clues. They had managed to narrow down the poison capsules to a single batch of extra-strength Tylenol, which did help narrow the scope of the investigation to Chicago and the surrounding suburbs, but still nothing concrete which would allow them to file charges against anyone. However, a second break would soon fall into their lap. Shortly after the initial string of murders, Johnson & Johnson received a letter from an individual claiming responsibility and threatening to kill more unless the company paid him $1 million ransom. The company forwarded the letter to the FBI, who traced it back to a man named James Lewis and quickly issued a warrant for his arrest. Lewis and his wife both went on the run to avoid police and seemed to bask in the notoriety from the case, with Lewis sending several more letters under various aliases and even going so far as to call into a radio station and taunt police on the airways. After a manhunt that stretched on for several weeks, Lewis was apprehended and brought in for questioning of both the murder and the extortion attempt. Mr. Lewis and his wife Leanne were both known con artists that had been charged in the murder of a Kansas City man, though the charges were later dropped due to procedural misconduct by the police. Lewis emphatically denied his involvement in both the poisoning and the letter to Johnson & Johnson. His claims of innocence on the latter charge were quickly disproven, as fingerprint analysis conclusively linked him to the letter, but proving the charges of murder would be much more difficult. Lewis was a resident of New York and claimed he was nowhere near Chicago when the poisoning took place. A claim that was backed up not by only his wife, but several other witnesses. Police couldn't shake the feeling this was their suspect, however, a feeling that grew even stronger when an analysis of surveillance footage from the Walgreens Paula Prince had stopped at just before her death revealed a man who bore a striking resemblance to Mr. Lewis standing just behind her. Despite months of exhaustive investigation, however, Illinois police and the FBI were unable to find any conclusive links between Mr. Lewis and the poisoning. He was, however, charged with attempted extortion of Johnson & Johnson, along with various other counts of fraud, and given a prison sentence of 20 years, which he served 13 of before being paroled in 1995. Lewis continued to aggressively proclaim his innocence even after his release, though many in the media and the court of public opinion still believed him to be the killer. The police echoed this sentiment, with leaked court documents in 2008 revealing that the Department of Justice believed Lewis was the killer, but simply lacked the evidence to charge him. The case was reopened in 2009, under the hopes that modern forensic science could finally help solve the long cold investigation. Several items were seized from Lewis, now living in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But again, no strong evidence was found to tie him to the killings. Both he and his wife submitted DNA samples in 2010, which did not result in charges being filed against either of them. Though the FBI and the DOJ have never officially exonerated Lewis for the murders, it does appear as though he is no longer under investigation. In one last desperate attempt to bring some closure to this case, in 2011, investigators took a sample of DNA from Ted Kaczynski, the infamous Unabomber who was sentenced to life in prison in January of 1998. The first bombings in Kaczynski's crime spree happened in the same area the poisonings had taken place, and he was also known to have occasionally stayed in a house his parents owned that was also within the area. This, however, was unfortunately another dead end. To this day, the Tylenol murders remain unsolved, and it does not appear investigators are currently looking into the case any further, though it does technically remain open. Understandably, the impact this case had on the pharmaceutical industry was profound. In 1982, manufacturers introduced the tamper-proof bottles we all know to this day, and the FDA set more strict regulations to avoid product tampering. In 1983, Congress passed the Federal Anti-Tampering Act, which made product tampering a federal offense punishable by up to 20 years in prison. Drug companies also started moving away from capsules in their over-the-counter medication, as they were much easier to contaminate, and moved towards solid tablets and sealed capsules that could not be pulled apart so easily. The most tragic thing of all, though, is 7 people died and no one was brought to justice for their deaths. Many of the victims' family members have since passed on and never received any closure regarding their loved one's death, which is one of the most excruciating feelings one can possibly imagine. As a reminder, there is always a link in the description of our videos to Victim Support Services, a charity who helps the victims of violent crime and their family members. We are not affiliated with them in any way, but we greatly support what they do, so if you can, consider donating. Also, if you enjoy watching videos about true crime and criminal justice history, consider subscribing so you can be updated whenever we post something new. This is Crime Spot, and thank you for watching.